Daniel Hayes dropped to his knees on the cold airport floor, in front of 500 strangers, and he didn't flinch. Not once. He had 7 minutes, maybe less. A woman he'd never met in his life was losing control of her body. Her baby was coming whether anyone was ready or not, and every single person in that terminal had frozen solid. Phones up, mouths open, doing absolutely nothing. But Daniel moved. What nobody knew, not the crowd, not the cameras, not even Victoria herself, was that the man now holding her hand had buried his own wife 3 years ago and hadn't let himself feel a single thing since. What happened next didn't just save 2 lives. It cracked open something in Daniel Hayes that had been locked shut for years, and nothing would ever be the same. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. And if this is your first time here, hit subscribe. You're going to want to be here for every part of this one. The morning Daniel Hayes almost missed the most important moment of his life. He was arguing with a vending machine. It was 6:47 a.m., Gate 14, Hartsfield-Jackson, Atlanta International Airport. He'd been awake since 4. He'd packed Lily's medication bag twice, checked the confirmation email for their Cleveland appointment 3 times, and driven 40 minutes through pre-dawn darkness with a 6-year-old asleep against the window, her small face tilted sideways, her mouth slightly open, her body completely trusting that her father had everything under control. He did not feel like he had everything under control. He fed the machine a crumpled dollar bill. It rejected it. He smoothed it against his thigh, fed it again. Rejected again. "Come on," he muttered. "It doesn't like wrinkled ones." He looked down. Lily was standing beside him, still holding her stuffed elephant. She'd named it Gerald, after nobody in particular, and looking up at the machine with the calm, analytical expression she'd inherited entirely from her mother. "It's $1, Lilybug. It doesn't care." "Apparently it does." She pointed at a small sign taped to the corner of the machine. "Please use smooth, flat bills." "See?" Daniel stared at the sign. Then he stared at his daughter. Then he reached into his back pocket, found a cleaner bill, and fed it through. The machine whirred. A pack of crackers dropped. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome." She took Gerald under her arm and walked back to their seats like a 40-year-old professor who had simply stopped by to offer a consultation. Daniel watched her go and felt a familiar pull in his chest. Part pride, part grief, part something he didn't have a name for. The combination hit him every time she did something like that, every time she sounded like Rachel. He grabbed the crackers and followed her. The flight to Cleveland had been delayed once already. Mechanical issue, they said, 45 minutes. And now the board was showing an additional delay, unspecified. The gate area was filling up. Families with strollers. Business travelers hunched over laptops. A group of college kids, who looked like they hadn't slept, draped over their carry-ons like casualties of a battle they'd chosen voluntarily. Daniel settled back into the hard plastic seat beside Lily, watching her color in a workbook she'd brought. She colored carefully, methodically, staying inside the lines with a seriousness that the activity probably didn't require. "You nervous?" he asked. She didn't look up. "About what?" "The appointment. Dr. Farhan." She considered this, still coloring. The elephant, a purple one on the page, though Gerald himself was gray, was receiving her full attention. "No," she said finally. "Should I be?" Daniel thought about how to answer that. Dr. Farhan was the 3rd specialist they'd seen in 2 years. The appointments had started when Lily was 4, when a series of infections and fatigue episodes had finally led to a diagnosis that Daniel still had trouble saying out loud without feeling the ground shift slightly beneath him. Juvenile onset autoimmune disorder. Rare. Manageable, they said, with the right treatment plan. But the right treatment plan had been slow to materialize, and in the meantime, there had been medication adjustments and flare-ups, and a night last February when Daniel had sat in the hospital parking lot at 2 a.m. and cried in his truck for 20 minutes before going back inside. "No," he said. "You don't need to be nervous. Dr. Farhan is good at what she does." "Then why do you look nervous?" He glanced at her. She was still coloring. "I don't look nervous." "You're doing the jaw thing." "What jaw thing?" "The thing where you clench your jaw and think no one notices." She finally looked up, meeting his eyes with Rachel's dark brown ones. "I notice." Daniel unclenched his jaw. "I'm fine," he said. "Okay," she said, and went back to her elephant. He opened the crackers and set them between them on the seat, and for a few minutes they sat there, the big, quiet man and the small, precise girl, in the unremarkable noise of a delayed airport terminal, waiting for something to happen. He didn't notice Victoria at first. That was the honest truth, and it was something he'd think about later, the ordinary randomness of it. He'd been watching the departures board and eating crackers and mentally running through the list of things he'd need to do once they landed in Cleveland. Rental car, hotel check-in, pharmacy pickup. He kept detailed lists in his head because detailed lists had kept him functional for the last 3 years. They were a kind of infrastructure. Without them, he suspected, he might simply stop moving. He noticed the woman across the terminal, the way you notice someone when your eyes drift and happen to land somewhere. Not a decision, just a reflex. She was sitting against the far wall, near a charging station. Late 30s, maybe early 40s. Dark suit jacket, hair pulled back, a laptop open on the seat beside her that she wasn't looking at. One hand was pressed flat against the side of her belly. Very pregnant, visibly so, at least 7 or 8 months by Daniel's rough estimation. And she was staring at the floor with the focused, controlled expression of someone managing pain. He looked away, ate another cracker, looked back. She hadn't moved. The hand on her belly was pressing harder now. Her eyes were closed. Her jaw was tight. Daniel set down the crackers. There was a feeling he got sometimes, a physical thing, like a shift in air pressure, that he associated with situations going wrong. He'd first felt it at 19, during a training exercise that ended badly. He'd felt it the night Rachel got her diagnosis. He felt it now. He stood up. "Where are you going?" Lily asked without looking up. "Stay here," he said. "Right here. Don't move." "I wasn't planning to." He walked. He crossed the terminal at a moderate pace, not running, because running would startle her and draw attention before he knew what was actually happening. He'd learned that in the army. Move with purpose, but not alarm. Get close enough to assess before you commit. When he got within 10 feet of her, she opened her eyes and looked at him with an expression that was equal parts pain and warning. "I'm fine," she said. The 2 most dishonest words in the English language, in Daniel's experience. "I didn't ask yet," he said. He crouched down to her eye level, keeping his voice low. "I'm not trying to bother you. I just want to make sure you're okay." "I'm fine," she said again, but this time there was a catch in it, a breath she had to manage. Her hand was still pressed against her side. "How far along are you?" She looked at him like the question was a strange one. 33 weeks, she said. "When did the pain start?" A pause. Her eyes did a quick calculation, how much to tell a stranger. And Daniel recognized that calculation because he'd seen it before, in the faces of people who were used to handling things alone, and had found themselves in a situation where handling it alone was no longer a realistic option. "About an hour ago," she said. "It's probably nothing. Braxton Hicks. I've had them before." "Okay," Daniel said. "And the ones you've had before, did they feel like this?" Another pause, longer this time. "No," she admitted. All right. He sat down on the floor beside her, not in the seat, on the floor, putting himself slightly below her eye line, making himself less of a looming presence and more of a level one. I'm Daniel. I'm not a doctor, but I was a combat medic for 6 years, and I'm going to ask you some questions if that's okay. She studied him for a moment. She had the look of someone who trusted very few people and had spent considerable time developing good reasons for that policy. Victoria, she said, and I have a doctor. I was going to call him when... She stopped, managed another breath. When we landed. Victoria, I need you to tell me if the contractions are getting closer together. They're not contractions. How many minutes apart? She closed her eyes, opened them. 12, maybe 10. Daniel nodded. He kept his face calm and his voice even. He had learned this too, that the way you delivered information in a crisis could make the difference between a person cooperating and a person panicking. And panicking almost always made things worse. I think you need to tell me if your water has broken, he said quietly. The expression on her face shifted, and in that shift, Daniel saw the moment when the performance of composure gave way to the reality beneath it. Her eyes went bright with something she was clearly trying to contain. 15 minutes ago, she said. Daniel stood up. I'm going to get help. I'm going to be back in 60 seconds. Don't stand up. Don't move around. And if the pain gets more intense before I get back, breathe through it. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Steady and slow. Can you do that? Yes, she said, with the tone of someone who had been running organizations for 2 decades and did not generally appreciate being given instructions by strangers in airports. Good. He turned and moved. The first person he found was a gate agent, a young woman with an airline badge, and the harried expression of someone already 20 tasks behind schedule. I need you to call for emergency medical assistance right now, Daniel said. Gate 14 against the east wall. Woman in active premature labor, 33 weeks, water broken, contractions 8 to 10 minutes apart and accelerating. The gate agent stared at him. Sir, I know that's a lot of information. Write this down. 33 weeks, water broken, premature labor, gate 14, east wall. Call it in. Right now. I'm going back to her. He didn't wait for her to answer. When he got back to Victoria, she was still sitting exactly where he'd left her. But her knuckles were white where her hand gripped the armrest, and the color in her face had changed. Help is coming, he said, sitting back down beside her. You didn't have to. I know. He glanced toward the seats where he'd left Lily. She was still there, still coloring, Gerald tucked under one arm. He exhaled. I've got a daughter over there. She's 6. She'll be fine for a few minutes. She's very self-sufficient. But I want to keep an eye on her. Victoria looked toward where he'd gestured and was quiet for a moment. How long have you been doing it alone? She asked. It was an oddly direct question from someone managing a medical emergency. But Victoria, Daniel would come to understand, had a mind that ran on parallel tracks. 3 years, he said. It's hard. Yeah, he paused. Do you have someone I can call? My assistant, but she's in Chicago. I'm supposed to be... Another breath, longer this time, deliberate. I'm supposed to be in Cleveland by noon. Board meeting. Not today. No. A short, humorless sound that might have been a laugh. Apparently not today. The next 20 minutes were the kind that compressed time. The paramedics were delayed. Accident on the highway, someone would explain later. The 2 ambulances nearest the terminal, both diverted. And the airport had a medical response team, but they were on the opposite concourse, and the radio communication was fractured. And meanwhile, Victoria's contractions were coming faster. 7 minutes. 6. The terminal crowd had noticed by now. A rough semicircle of people had formed at a respectful distance, the way crowds form around emergencies, drawn by the event, but uncertain whether to step closer or back away. Daniel was aware of all of this, and none of it. He'd done field triage in conditions that made a carpeted airport terminal feel like a surgical suite. He had delivered one baby before, a village outside Kandahar, 14 years ago. A situation he had never spoken about to anyone except Rachel, who had held his hand while he told it and said quietly, "You were someone's miracle that day." He had not thought about that in years. He thought about it now. "Victoria." He kept his voice steady. "Look at me." She looked at him. "I need you to know something," he said. "I've done this before. Not in an airport. Somewhere a lot less comfortable than this. And I need you to understand that you are going to be fine, and your baby is going to be fine. But I need you to trust me for the next little while. Can you do that?" She held his gaze for a long moment, and in that moment something passed between them. Not warmth exactly, not yet, but recognition. One person who had been carrying things alone, looking at another person who had been carrying things alone, and both of them understanding something without saying it. "Yes," she said. "Good." He turned to the nearest bystander, a middle-aged man in a polo shirt who'd been watching with the expression of someone desperately wanting to be useful. "What's your name?" The man blinked. "Ron?" "Ron, I need you to go to that gate desk right now and get me every clean towel or cloth they have. Blankets if they've got them. Tell them it's for the woman in labor. Move fast." Ron moved fast. "You," he pointed to a young woman closer to the front of the crowd. "Can you call 911 directly? Not airport security, 911. Tell them active premature labor, gate 14, Atlanta Hartsfield. They need to know it might progress before the airport medical team arrives." She already had her phone out. "On it." He turned back to Victoria. She was breathing. "Good." "You're doing well," he said. "I'm really not." "You're doing better than you think." He paused. "Tell me something. What are you going to name her?" The question landed on Victoria like something unexpected. She blinked. "Her? You said she. You said she doesn't have a name yet." He hadn't heard Victoria say anything of the sort. He exhaled. "Sorry. I'm sorry. Do you know what you're having?" "A girl," Victoria said. "Yes." A beat. "Ellie. I've been calling her Ellie." "That's a good name." "It was my grandmother's." Another contraction hit, and he watched her ride it, her eyes closing, her breath going controlled and deliberate. A woman who dealt with difficulty by technique, not surrender. "Breathe out slowly," he said, "like you're blowing out a candle, slow and steady." She did. "Good, you're doing great." "You said that." "I meant it both times." Lily appeared at his elbow. He turned, startled, and found his daughter standing 3 feet away, with Gerald tucked under her arm and her coloring book held flat at her side, watching Victoria with a calm, thoughtful expression. "Lily," he kept his voice low, "I said stay in the seats." "I did for a while." She looked at Victoria.
"Is the baby coming now?"
"Lily, it's okay," Victoria said, surprising them both. Her voice had gone softer. She was looking at Lily with an expression Daniel hadn't seen on her face yet. Something unguarded. "Yes, sweetheart. The baby's coming a little early." "Is that scary?" "A little," Victoria said honestly. Lily considered this. Then she held out Gerald, her gray stuffed elephant, worn at the ears, slightly lopsided from years of being slept on, and held it toward Victoria. "Gerald helps," she said simply. He helped me when I was scared at the hospital." Victoria looked at the elephant, then at Lily. Then she reached out and took it, and held it against her chest. And something in her face broke open in a way that was entirely outside her control. "Thank you," she said. Daniel looked at his daughter and felt, again, that unnameable pull in his chest, the grief and the pride and the other thing. And he had to look away for a moment to keep his own face neutral. "Sit right here," he told Lily, pointing to the floor beside him. "Right here. Don't move. Watch me." "Okay," she said, and sat down cross-legged on the airport carpet like it was a perfectly normal place to be. The airport medical team arrived 8 minutes later, and the paramedics arrived 12 minutes after that. But in the space between those arrivals, in the hard fluorescent light of Gate 14, with 500 people watching and no one making a sound, Daniel Hayes delivered a baby girl. Ellie came into the world at 7:34 a.m. in an airport terminal, in her mother's arms, guided by a man whose hands did not shake, a man who had learned steadiness the hard way, in deserts and in grief, and in 3 years of raising a daughter alone. The baby did not cry. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Daniel had ever heard. He worked quickly, quietly, with the focused efficiency of someone who had made peace with fear a long time ago. He cleared the airway. He kept his movements deliberate. He counted, internally, tracking the seconds. The terminal was completely silent. Lily, beside him, had stopped breathing, or so it seemed. She was perfectly still, Geraldless now, her hands folded in her lap, watching. And then Ellie cried. It was the smallest sound, thin and high and furious. The protest of a person who had arrived ahead of schedule and had opinions about it. And the terminal erupted. Not in chaos, in something rarer. Applause. A wave of it, building from the front of the crowd and rolling backward through the concourse, until it reached people who hadn't even seen what happened, but clapped anyway, because the feeling was contagious and the sound was unmistakable. A few people were crying. Ron, who had returned with his armload of blankets and had stood helplessly nearby for the last 10 minutes, was crying openly and making no effort to hide it. Daniel wrapped Ellie in a blanket, pale blue, folded 3 times, provided by a flight attendant who had pushed through the crowd with shaking hands, and placed her on Victoria's chest. Victoria looked down at her daughter, and for a moment, just a moment, every defense she had ever built, every wall and protocol and professional surface, was completely gone. She was just a woman holding her daughter for the first time, in an airport, against all expectation and all reasonable plan, and she was undone by it entirely. She looked up at Daniel. "Thank you," she said. It was the same phrase she'd use later, when the cameras came, and when the reporters called, and when the hospital room was full of flowers, and everyone wanted a piece of the story. But none of those times would carry what this one carried, said on the floor of Gate 14, raw and unscripted, from one exhausted human being to another. Daniel nodded. He didn't trust himself to speak. Beside him, Lily leaned against his arm and watched the baby with large, serious eyes. "She's very small," Lily said. "She'll get bigger," Daniel said. "Like I did?" "Yeah," he said, "like you did." The paramedics arrived 90 seconds later. Daniel stepped back and let them work, moving to the edge of the crowd, and stood there with Lily pressed against his side, watching them take over, feeling the adrenaline beginning its long retreat. Someone in the crowd said something about a hero. Daniel heard it and said nothing. He was looking at his daughter, who was looking at the baby, who was breathing. That was enough. They made the rescheduled flight to Cleveland at 11:15 a.m. Lily slept against the window the whole way. Gerald restored to his position under her arm, her face tilted sideways, her mouth slightly open. Daniel sat beside her and stared straight ahead and thought about Rachel, which he normally didn't allow himself to do on purpose. He thought about her saying, "You were someone's miracle that day." He thought about how he'd spent 3 years trying to keep himself small enough that he wouldn't need to be someone's anything. Just a father, just a mechanic, just a man with a list of tasks and a daughter to get to her appointments. Nothing more complicated than that. He thought about the way Victoria had looked at him when Ellie cried. He thought about how Lily had handed over Gerald without hesitation, her most important possession, the thing that had helped her through 2 years of hospital visits, and given it to a stranger, because the stranger was scared. He closed his eyes. Outside the window, Atlanta fell away beneath the clouds, and Daniel Hayes, single father and mechanic and former medic, let himself feel, just for a moment, the weight of what had happened in Gate 14. Not the heroism of it. He didn't think about it that way. But the ordinary truth of it. Someone had needed help. He had been there. He had helped. And somehow, in a way he couldn't fully explain yet, something that had been locked up inside of him for 3 years had shifted. Not broken open, just shifted. A small movement. The kind that sometimes, quietly, changes everything. He didn't know Victoria's last name. He didn't know anything about her beyond what he'd seen in the last 2 hours. He didn't know that she was CEO of a company that had been running clinical trials for rare pediatric autoimmune disorders. He didn't know that the name of her company would mean something to him very soon. He knew none of that. He just knew that the baby had cried, and the crowd had applauded, and his daughter had given away her elephant without being asked. He opened his eyes. He looked at Lily. "Hey, Lilybug." She stirred, barely. "You did good today." She didn't open her eyes. "You did too, Dad." He looked back out the window. Yeah, he thought. Maybe I did. The Cleveland appointment went well, all things considered. Dr. Farhan was a small, precise woman with reading glasses she wore pushed up on her forehead and the habit of speaking directly to Lily rather than over her head at Daniel, which had earned her his loyalty within the first 5 minutes of their first visit. She reviewed the latest blood work, adjusted one of the medications by a small margin, and told Lily that her numbers were moving in the right direction, which was the phrase she used when things were better but not yet good enough to celebrate. Lily accepted this information with her usual composure. Daniel accepted it with the practiced calm of a man who had learned to hold hope at arm's length, close enough to feel it, far enough that it couldn't knock him down when it shifted. They ate dinner at a diner 2 blocks from the hotel, and Lily had a grilled cheese and a chocolate milkshake, and Daniel had coffee and scrambled eggs, because he hadn't been hungry since approximately 7:30 that morning. And the diner was warm and quiet, and outside the window the Cleveland evening was gray and moving toward dark. "Do you think the baby is okay?" Lily asked. Daniel looked up from his coffee. "Yeah, I think she's okay. She was so small." Premature babies are small, but the doctors had her, and her mom had her. She's going to be fine. Lily stirred her milkshake thoughtfully. "What was her name again?" "Ellie." "That's pretty." She considered it. "Do you think she'll remember when she grows up?" "Remember what?" "Being born in an airport?" Daniel almost smiled. "She won't remember it. She'll be told about it." "That's almost the same thing," Lily said. He looked at her. "How do you figure that?" "Because stories become memories. Grandma told me about when Mom was little, and now I can see it in my head, even though I wasn't there." She took a long pull on her milkshake. Ellie will see the airport in her head, even though she won't actually remember it, because someone will tell her. Daniel set down his coffee cup. "Yeah," he said after a moment. "I think you're right." Lily nodded, satisfied, and went back to her grilled cheese. Daniel sat with the weight of that. Stories become memories, and thought about all the stories he hadn't told Lily yet. All the ones he'd been holding back, deciding she was too young, waiting for some future version of the conversation that he hadn't gotten around to starting. He thought about Rachel. He thought, she should know more stories about her mother. He didn't say it out loud, but he filed it somewhere, a thing to return to. They flew home the next morning. The story broke while he was under a Chevy Silverado. He was on his back on the creeper, halfway through a brake job, when Marcus, his shop partner, a 52-year-old man with a white mustache and the persistent, cheerful energy of someone who had figured out that life was too short to be anything other than annoying, walked up and nudged his boot with one foot. "Hey!" "What? You in the news?" Daniel pushed himself out from under the truck and looked up at Marcus, who was holding his phone in the way people hold phones when they already know the answer to the question they're asking. "No," Daniel said. Marcus showed him the screen. The headline read, "Mechanic and former Army medic delivers premature baby at Atlanta airport. Bystander video goes viral." Below it was a photograph, grainy, taken from a distance, of Daniel crouched on the terminal floor, his hands steady, the crowd visible at the edges of the frame. Daniel looked at it for a moment. Then he stood up and handed the phone back. "Good for them," he said, and reached for the brake caliper. "Good for them?" Marcus stared. "Daniel, this is you. That's your back. I recognize the jacket." "Marcus, you delivered a baby at the airport and didn't mention it." "I was focused on getting Lily to her appointment." "You delivered a baby." "It wasn't—" He stopped. "It was a situation that needed handling. I handled it. That's all." Marcus stared at him for another long moment, with the expression he wore when Daniel was being difficult, which, Marcus would tell you, was often. Then he looked back at his phone and scrolled slowly. "The woman's name is Victoria Mercer," he said, "CEO of Meritech Solutions, medical technology company out of Chicago. It says here," he squinted, "that she's recovering well. The baby is in NICU but stable, and she's, quote, deeply grateful to the man who helped her and hopes to thank him personally." He looked up. "She's looking for you." "She knows my name," Daniel said. "I told her. So she can find you. I guess." "And you're not curious?" Daniel slid back under the Silverado. "I'm on a timeline with these brakes," he said. Marcus stood there for another moment, talking to the underside of the truck. "You know," he said, "most people, something like that happens, they at least mention it. Over dinner, maybe. Normal human communication." "I mentioned it to Lily." "You mentioned it to your 6-year-old. She was there." Marcus threw up both hands in the general direction of the ceiling and walked back to his side of the shop. The call came 4 days later. Daniel was making dinner. Pasta, the kind Lily liked with butter and too much Parmesan, when his phone rang with a Chicago area code. He almost didn't answer. He stood there for 2 full rings, the pasta spoon in his hand, looking at the screen. He answered. "Daniel Hayes?" The voice was measured, professionally warm. An assistant, he guessed, before she said, "Please hold for Victoria Mercer." He held. The pasta water was boiling. He turned it down. "Daniel." Victoria's voice was different than he remembered it. Steadier. The controlled pain stripped out. Something quieter underneath. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Making dinner," he said. "It's fine. How are you?" "Better." A brief pause. "Better than I have any right to be, probably." Ellie she's doing well. She's in the NICU still. They want to keep her another week. But her lungs are stronger than they expected for 33 weeks. And he heard her stop herself, collect something. She's going to be fine. They're telling me she's going to be fine. That's good, Daniel said. That's really good, Victoria. I owe you. She stopped again. I'm not good at this. I want you to know that. I manage things. I solve problems. Gratitude at this scale is, a short exhale, outside my usual operating range. Despite himself, Daniel almost smiled. You don't owe me anything. I disagree. I was there. Anyone with training would have done the same thing. But it wasn't anyone with training, she said. It was you. And I've thought about that a lot this week, lying in the hospital bed with a lot of time to think. And I keep coming back to the fact that you left your daughter sitting alone on the floor of an airport terminal and crossed a room to help a stranger. You didn't have to do that. Daniel was quiet for a moment. The pasta was ready. He didn't move. My daughter tells me that's exactly what you're supposed to do, he said. Victoria made a sound, soft, slightly undone. She gave me her elephant. I know. She's been asking about Gerald every day. I told her he was with Ellie, and she said that was fine, because Ellie needed him more. Daniel, Victoria's voice had shifted. I'd like to meet you. Properly. Both of you. I want to bring Gerald home, and I want to... She paused. I want Lily to meet Ellie, if you'd be open to that, when she's out of the NICU. Daniel leaned back against the kitchen counter. He thought about saying no. He thought about the careful, narrow life he'd built. The shop, the school runs, the medication schedules, the lists, the infrastructure. He thought about Lily saying stories become memories. Okay, he said. 3 weeks later, on a Saturday in October, Daniel drove to Atlanta Medical Center with Lily in the back seat, asking questions he didn't entirely know how to answer. Is she going to look normal? She's going to look like a very small baby. Will she be in a glass box? A warming incubator, yes, maybe. Or she might be out by now. Can I hold her? That's up to her mom. Lily considered this. Then, what does her mom look like? You saw her. You were there. I know, but she was different then. She was lying on the floor. Daniel glanced in the rearview mirror. She's tall, dark hair, professional. Like a businesswoman? Exactly like a businesswoman. Are you nervous? He looked at the road. No. You're doing the jaw thing. He unclenched his jaw. Victoria met them in the lobby. She was standing when they walked in, upright, put together, though the previous 3 weeks had left something in her face that hadn't been there before. A softness around the edges that her professional surface hadn't quite reclaimed. She was carrying Gerald. She handed the elephant to Lily first. Thank you for lending him, Victoria said, crouching to Lily's level. He was very helpful. Lily received Gerald with solemnity, inspected him briefly, and seemed satisfied. I knew he would be, she said. Then she looked up at Victoria with her mother's dark eyes. Can I see Ellie? Victoria smiled. A real one, not the managed kind. Yes, she said. She would like that very much. Daniel and Victoria stood for a moment after Lily had transferred her attention to Gerald. You look better, Daniel said. I feel better. She met his eyes. Thank you for coming. You don't have to keep thanking me. I'll stop when it starts feeling like enough, she said, which hasn't happened yet. They walked toward the elevators, Lily between them, describing to Gerald in detail what was about to happen. preparing him, apparently, for the sight of an incubator. Daniel listened to his daughter explain neonatal care to a stuffed elephant with the tone of someone giving a thorough pre-mission briefing, and he felt, again, the unnameable thing, grief and pride, and the other one, the one that had no name. The NICU room was quiet and warm. A nurse held the door and nodded, and Daniel stayed near the entrance while Victoria led Lily to the incubator, which was open now. Ellie had graduated, apparently, from the closed kind. She was small, in the way that premature babies are small. The kind of small that makes you adjust your entire understanding of scale. She had dark hair, fine and new, and her hands were curled against her chin, and she was asleep. Lily stood at the edge of the incubator and looked at her for a long time without saying anything. Then she said, very quietly, "Hi, Ellie." Ellie didn't wake up, but her hands moved slightly, uncurling and curling again, the way sleeping babies do. "She knows I'm here," Lily said, with complete confidence. "I think she does," Victoria agreed. Daniel stood by the door and watched his daughter watch this baby, and he thought about the morning in the terminal, the silence before the cry, the seconds counting down. And he thought about all the mornings after that one, when he'd woken up and made breakfast and done the school run and opened the shop and handled his list, each day quietly carrying whatever the previous day had left. He'd been doing it alone. He'd gotten very good at it. He hadn't realized until this moment how much work that had required. Victoria appeared beside him. She was watching Lily too. "She's remarkable," Victoria said. "Yeah," Daniel said. "She takes after you." "She takes after her mother," he said. "But I'm working on it." Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then, "How long has it been?" 3 years. "I'm sorry." "Thank you." He paused. "You?" She looked at him. "Ellie's father he's not in the picture. He chose that." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Some choices tell you everything you need to know about a person." They stood together in the quiet of the NICU room, two people who had been carrying things alone, and neither of them said anything for a moment. And the silence was not uncomfortable, which surprised them both. "There's something I want to tell you," Victoria said finally. She turned to face him, and her expression was the careful one. The one she wore, he was learning, when she was being very deliberate about what she was choosing to say. "Meritech, my company. We run research trials, clinical trials." She paused. "We've been developing a treatment protocol for juvenile-onset autoimmune disorders. The trial is small right now, 12 participants, and the preliminary results are—" She stopped. Restarted. "Daniel, the results are significant. 2 of the children in the trial have moved into full remission." He looked at her. "It's not a guarantee," she said quickly. "I want to be very clear about that. It's a trial. There are risks. The protocol is intensive. But the data is—" She met his eyes. "If Lily's profile matches what we're looking for, I want her considered for the trial." Daniel's chest had gone very still. "Victoria, I'm not offering you this because you helped me," she said. "I want to be very clear about that too. I'm telling you because you deserve to know it exists, and because Lily is exactly the patient population this trial is designed for. And because," her voice caught, almost imperceptibly, "because you came across a room when you didn't have to, and your daughter gave my daughter her elephant. And I am not willing to know that this trial exists and not tell you." He looked at Lily, who was now holding Gerald up to show to Ellie, explaining the elephant's various features in a tone that suggested Ellie was an attentive listener. He felt something shift in his chest, The same small movement he'd felt on the plane. The quiet, structural change. The thing that was not quite hope, but was beginning to clear space for it. "Send me the information," he said. "Already in your email," she said. "I sent it this morning. In case you said yes." He looked at her. "You were pretty confident." "I'm a businesswoman," she said. "I research before I invest." "You researched me?" "You delivered my daughter in an airport. Yes, Daniel, I researched you." He made a sound. Short, involuntary. That was the closest thing to a laugh he'd managed in longer than he could remember. It came out rough, unpracticed, like something that had been stored away and needed a moment to find its shape again. Victoria looked at him when it happened. She didn't say anything, but something in her face went quiet in a specific way. The way a room goes quiet when something important has just been said. Across the room, Lily looked over at them. "Dad," she said, "Gerald wants to know if we can come back." Daniel looked at her. He looked at the baby in the incubator. He looked at Victoria. "We can come back," he said. Lily nodded, satisfied, and turned back to resume her briefing. Gerald, apparently, had more questions. Daniel turned back to the door and breathed once, slowly, the way he used to breathe before the hard parts. In through the nose, out through the mouth, steady and slow. The same instruction he'd given Victoria on the floor of Gate 14. The same one he'd been giving himself, quietly, for 3 years. He stood there in the warmth of the NICU room, with his daughter nearby, and a stranger who was no longer entirely a stranger beside him. And he let himself feel, just for a moment, carefully, the way you rest weight on ice to test it before you trust it fully. Something that might, in time, grow into what it was trying to be. Outside the window, October was moving through Atlanta, stripping the trees down to their honest structures. Daniel Hayes stood still and let it. Dr. Farhan read the trial documents the way she read everything, carefully, without expression, her glasses pushed up on her forehead, one hand flat on the desk. Daniel sat across from her and watched her read, and tried to keep his breathing even. Lily was in the waiting room with a puzzle. She didn't know why they were there. Daniel had told her it was a follow-up, which was not entirely untrue. Farhan turned the last page and set the packet down. "Meritech," she said. "Yes." "I know their work." She folded her hands. "I know the lead researcher on this protocol, Dr. Singh. He presented at the immunology conference in Boston last spring. The preliminary data is," she paused, choosing the word, "compelling." "That's what I understood," Daniel said. "It's also a phase 2 trial, which means we're still in the stage where we're learning as much as we're treating. That's not a reason to avoid it, but it's a reason to go in with full information." "I understand." "The protocol is intensive. Infusions every 3 weeks for the first 6 months. Blood draws between. Possible side effects include fatigue, nausea, and in a small number of cases, temporary worsening of existing symptoms before improvement begins." She looked at him steadily. "How is Lily handling the current medication adjustment?" "Better. The fatigue is down. She had a good month." "Good months are important." Farhan was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Daniel, I want to tell you something, and I want you to hear it as information, not as a recommendation one way or the other." "Okay." 2 of the 12 participants in this trial are currently showing markers consistent with sustained remission. 2 others are showing significant reduction in disease activity. That's 4 out of 12 at the 8-month mark. She let that sit. In Lily's disease category, sustained remission is not a word that appears in most treatment literature. Daniel looked at his hands. "I know," he said. "I can't promise you anything," Farhan said. "Neither can Dr. Singh. and neither can Victoria Mercer. But I can tell you that if Lily's profile matches the inclusion criteria, and based on what I'm reading, I believe it does, I would recommend you speak to the trial team. Daniel looked up. Would you recommend she enroll? Farhan held his gaze. If she were my daughter, she said. Yes. Daniel nodded once, slowly, and sat with that for a moment. Okay, he said. Set up the call. He told Lily that night, after dinner, sitting on the couch with the TV off and Gerald on the cushion between them, which was Gerald's standard position during important conversations. Lily listened the way she always listened, completely, without interrupting, with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on his face, processing. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then, so it might make me better. Like, actually better. It might. There's no guarantee. And the treatment has some hard parts. But some kids got better, like all the way. 2 kids so far, yes. She looked at Gerald. She seemed to be consulting him privately. Then she looked back at Daniel. Is it because of Victoria, she asked, that we found out about it? Yes, he said. He didn't see any point in softening it. Lily had a finely tuned detector for softened truths. She told me about it when we visited the hospital. Because you helped her. She said it wasn't about that. She said it was because she wanted you to know it existed. Lily thought about this. I think it's both, she said finally. I think she means it isn't only because of that, but it's still part of it. Daniel looked at his daughter. When did you get so analytical? I've always been analytical. You just don't always listen. He put his arm around her, and she leaned into his side, which she still did when she was tired or when conversations had gotten heavier than usual, and which she would probably stop doing someday. Some future someday that Daniel tried not to think about too directly. Are you scared? He asked. Of the trial? Yeah. She thought about it honestly, the way she did. A little, she said. But I'm more tired of being sick. She paused. Is that okay to say? Yeah, Lilybug, he said. That's okay to say. She leaned harder against his arm. Dad? What? Victoria's nice. He was quiet for a beat. Yeah, she is. She looked at you funny when you laughed in the hospital. I wasn't... He stopped. I laughed. You did. And she looked at you like she'd never heard anything like it. Lily delivered this observation with complete neutrality, the tone of a scientist noting a data point. I just thought it was interesting. Daniel had absolutely nothing to say to that. He sat there, with his daughter tucked against him, and the TV still off, and Gerald, stoic between them, and he thought about a lot of things that he elected not to say out loud. Go brush your teeth, he said finally. I know, she said, and got up without argument, which told him she'd made her point and was satisfied with the results. The call with Dr. Singh lasted 90 minutes and covered more medical terminology than Daniel had encountered since his army training, some of which overlapped and some of which did not. He took notes on a legal pad, 3 pages front and back, in the small, precise handwriting he developed in the field, when writing clearly under pressure had been an actual operational requirement. Victoria was on the call. She'd asked, when he mentioned it was scheduled, if he wanted her there. He'd said yes before he'd fully decided why, and then decided the reason was that she had context he didn't. Medical technology, research language, the specific vocabulary of the field. And that was practical. And practical was something he was comfortable with. She spoke twice during the call, both times to clarify terminology, both times without stepping on Dr. Singh's explanation. She was good at that, Daniel noticed, occupying exactly as much space as was useful, and not a square inch more. After the call ended, they stayed on the line. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "I'm thinking I need to read these notes again when my head isn't full." "That's fair." A pause. "He's good, Singh. He's not a salesman. What he told you was accurate." "I know. Farhan said the same thing about him." "What does Lily think?" "She said she's more tired of being sick than she is scared of the treatment," he said, looking at his notes, the phrase sitting on the page in his own handwriting. More tired of being sick. He'd written it down while Lily was talking, because it had hit him like something he needed to keep. Victoria was quiet for a moment. "She said that?" "Yeah." "That's—" He heard something in her voice that she didn't finish. "She's remarkable, Daniel. I said it before, but I mean it." "She told me you're nice," he said. A short pause. "She told you that?" "She also said you looked at me funny when I laughed at the hospital." The pause this time was longer. "I wasn't aware I was being observed," Victoria said. 6-year-olds are thorough. "Apparently." Another pause, shorter. "You have a good laugh," she said, with the tone of someone making a factual statement, and intending it to land no heavier than that, and not entirely succeeding. Daniel looked at his legal pad. "I'll call Dr. Singh tomorrow," he said. "I think we're going to say yes." "Okay," Victoria said. "I'm glad." Lily's first infusion was on a Tuesday in November, 3.5 weeks after the NICU visit. Daniel sat beside her in the treatment chair. She was too small for it, her feet nowhere near the edge, her infusion arm resting on the padded support with a patience that made his chest ache. And she did a word search puzzle and ate crackers from a small bag and asked the nurse, whose name was Deb, approximately 47 questions about how the IV line worked. Deb answered all of them. "She's incredible," Deb told Daniel quietly, while Lily was occupied with the word search. "I know," Daniel said. "Does she know what she's like?" He thought about it. "I think she knows she's unusual. I don't think she spends much time thinking about it." "Smart kid." Terrifyingly. Deb laughed and went back to her chart, and Daniel sat beside his daughter and read the word search answers over her shoulder because he couldn't help himself. And Lily told him 3 times to stop giving it away. And the infusion took 4 hours, and by the end of it, Lily was tired in a way that was different from her usual tired. Heavier, quieter, like something had been asked of her body that it was still negotiating. She fell asleep in the car on the way home, with her face against the window and her hands loose in her lap. And Daniel drove the whole way without the radio on, just the road and the sound of her breathing, which he had always listened to, even before the diagnosis, even before there was a reason to pay particular attention to the sound of Lily breathing. That night, after she was in bed, he sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold and called Victoria. "First one's done," he said. "How is she?" "Tired. Fell asleep on the way home." She asked the nurse 47 questions and then did a word search for 4 hours. He heard Victoria exhale, the kind of exhale that carries relief and something warmer in it. "That sounds exactly like her." "Yeah." He looked at the cold coffee. "She's tough," he said. "Tougher than she should have to be at 6. "She doesn't think of it as tough. That's the thing about kids like her. They just do what's in front of them." "Rachel was like that," he said. It came out before he decided to say it. He sat with it for a second, surprised at himself. Victoria let the silence hold, and didn't rush it, which was the right thing to do. "Tell me about her," she said. He hadn't been asked that in a long time. People said, "I'm sorry about Rachel," or they said, "How are you holding up?" Or they said nothing at all, and moved the conversation somewhere safer. Nobody asked him to tell them about her. Maybe because they were worried it would hurt him. Maybe because they didn't know that the not telling hurt more. She was a teacher, he said. 3rd grade. She had this way of explaining things, complicated things, where she'd take the most tangled version of it and somehow find the simplest true center and just hand it to you. Like, here, this is what it actually is. He paused. Lily does that. She gets it from her. It sounds like she was wonderful. She was stubborn and impatient, and she couldn't cook anything except pasta, and she laughed too loud in movie theaters. And yes, he said, she was wonderful. Victoria was quiet for a moment. I think she'd be glad you were at that airport. Daniel looked at the table. Why? Because you're good at it, she said simply. The thing you did. Showing up when someone needs it. Being steady. I don't think people like that are made from easy lives. A pause. I think she helped make you who you are. He didn't say anything for a long time. The kitchen was very quiet. Through the wall, he could hear nothing from Lily's room, which meant she was still asleep, which meant she was okay. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me for telling the truth, she said. The weeks took on a shape. Every 3 weeks, Lily had an infusion. She and Daniel developed a ritual around it. Pancakes at the diner near the clinic before, and a specific documentary series about ocean animals that they watched together on Lily's tablet during the infusion. And the milkshake from the drive-thru on the way home. Always chocolate. Non-negotiable. The rituals helped. Daniel had always known that about rituals. They made the hard things survivable by giving them a familiar container. Between the infusions, there were phone calls. It started as practical. Updates on Lily's numbers, coordination around the trial schedule, a question here and there about something in the medical documentation. But the calls got longer, and they moved, gradually, away from strictly practical. Victoria told him about the company. Not the public version, but the real one. The one that had taken 12 years and 2 failed funding rounds, and a period where she'd paid her engineers before she paid herself. She told him about her grandmother, the original Ellie, a woman who had grown up in rural Georgia and put herself through nursing school by working nights, and had told Victoria when she was 8 years old, "The world doesn't slow down for you, so you'd better learn to move with it." She told him about the loneliness of being the only woman in certain rooms for certain years, and how she'd decided at some point that the loneliness was information, not a verdict. Daniel told her things too. Slowly, the way cold water comes from a tap that hasn't been used in a while. Hesitant at first, then steadier. He told her about the army, about the village outside Kandahar, the baby he'd delivered there, the woman who had looked at him the same way Victoria had looked at him on the floor of Gate 14, with the particular trust of someone who has decided, in the middle of a crisis, to hand their fear to another person. He told her that he'd never been able to explain what that felt like, the weight of being trusted like that, and that he thought maybe that was why he'd spent a year after leaving the army trying to figure out if he was actually built for civilian life. He told her about the night Rachel's diagnosis had changed from manageable to something else, and how he'd sat in the hospital parking lot and recalibrated every plan he'd ever made for their future, and how Rachel, when he came back inside, had looked at his face and said, "Stop doing the math on how long we have, and start doing the math on how good we can make it." And how he'd tried, and how he thought he'd done okay at it, but still wasn't sure.
"You did more than okay," Victoria said.
"You didn't know us." "I know Lily," she said. "Lily is your grade." He sat with that one for a long time. Ellie came home from the NICU on a Thursday, 3 days after her original due date. Full term, technically, despite everything. Victoria sent him a photo. a small, dark-haired baby with enormous eyes, bundled in a yellow blanket, looking at the camera with a deeply skeptical expression of someone who had already been through a great deal and was reserving judgment on the rest. He showed it to Lily at breakfast. Lily looked at the photo for a long time. "She looks like she has opinions," she said. "She does look that way." "Good," Lily said, and went back to her cereal. "That's important." It was Marcus who said it out loud first, which surprised no one who knew Marcus. They were in the shop, a slow afternoon, a Wednesday in December with thin light coming through the high windows, and a repair log that had given them, mercifully, a 2-hour window of low activity. Marcus was eating a sandwich. Daniel was reviewing invoices. The radio was on low. "You're different," Marcus said. Daniel didn't look up. "I've been the same since 1987. Different from 6 months ago. I'm tired. Lily's in a trial. I've been... Not tired different. Different. Marcus set down his sandwich. "You laughed yesterday." "I laugh." "You don't laugh. You make a sound sometimes that could generously be classified as a laugh. Yesterday, you actually laughed. At the thing I said about the Buick." Daniel looked up at him. "The thing about the Buick was genuinely funny," he said. "I have been saying funny things for 3 years," Marcus said, with great dignity. "This is the first time you laughed at one." He picked his sandwich back up. "It's the woman, Victoria." "Marcus, I'm not making a big deal. I'm observing." "You're making it a big deal by observing." "Am I wrong?" Daniel put down the invoice. He looked at the middle distance for a moment, at the nothing between him and the shop wall, and thought about being honest. We're not... He stopped, started again. "It's not like that. She's got a newborn and a company. I've got a kid in a medical trial and a brake job on Tuesday." "That's not what I asked," Marcus said. Daniel picked the invoice back up. "You're not wrong," he said, very quietly, to the paper. Marcus nodded once, satisfied, and finished his sandwich without saying another word about it, which was the most merciful thing he'd ever done. Lily's blood draw results came back on a Friday morning, 8 weeks into the trial. Daniel was at the shop when his phone rang. He stepped outside into the cold December air to take it. It was Dr. Singh. "Mr. Hayes, I want to talk to you about Lily's latest markers." Daniel's hand tightened on the phone. He made himself breathe, in through the nose, out through the mouth. "Okay," he said. "I'm here." Dr. Singh's voice was the careful, measured voice of a man who had learned to deliver news, all kinds of news, without loading it with his own reaction first, so that the patient's family could receive it cleanly and decide what to feel without being led. "Her inflammatory markers are down 31% from baseline," Dr. Singh said. "Her autoantibody levels have dropped measurably for the first time since her diagnosis. And her energy report, the one she fills out herself, which I want you to know she fills out with remarkable precision for a 6-year-old. She does everything with remarkable precision," Daniel said. "She does. Her self-reported energy is up, significantly." A pause. "Mr. Hayes, it's 8 weeks. It's early. I want to be very clear about that. But these are the numbers I was hoping to see. And in some cases, they're better than I was hoping to see." Daniel sat down on the curb outside the shop. He didn't plan to. His legs made the decision. "Okay," he said. "I'd like to do a full review at the 12-week mark. But I want you to know today, because you deserve to know today." "Thank you, Dr. Singh." "She's a fighter," Singh said. "Whatever you've done to raise a kid who faces this the way she does, keep doing it." Daniel sat on the curb for a moment after he hung up, in the cold December air, and he thought about Rachel, And he thought about Gate 14. And he thought about Lily on a too-big infusion chair, doing a word search and asking 47 questions. And he pressed his palm flat against his knee to give himself something to push against. His eyes burned. He let them. He sat there for a while. Then he called Victoria. She answered on the second ring, the way she always answered, like she'd been expecting him. 31%, he said. She went quiet. Daniel, down from baseline, 8 weeks. He heard her exhale, long, slow, the way you exhale when something you've been hoping for starts to look like something real. I know, she said softly. Singh called me too. You knew before me? He called me 2 minutes ago. I was about to call you. He laughed. Again, the real one, rough and unpracticed, the one that seemed to surprise him every time it happened. And across the city, in her office on the 14th floor, with Ellie asleep in the portable bassinet she'd brought in because she could not yet stand to be far from her, Victoria Mercer heard Daniel Hayes laugh. And she stopped pretending, even to herself, that it wasn't her favorite sound she'd heard in a very long time. Christmas came the way it always did in the Hayes house, with Lily's particular brand of organizational intensity. She had a list. She had a timeline. She had opinions about the tree, which needed to be real, and needed to be at least 6 feet tall, and needed to be acquired no later than the second week of December, which was a rule she had established at age 4, and enforced with the consistency of federal law. Daniel had never once successfully argued with the tree timeline. He'd stopped trying around the same time he'd stopped arguing with the vending machine. They got the tree on a Saturday. Lily directed its installation with Gerald under one arm, pointing at specific branches that needed adjustment, and Daniel moved the tree stand a total of 4 times before she was satisfied. And he did it without complaint, because the sight of her standing in the living room with her boots still on and her coat half unzipped, pointing at a tree with the authority of a woman overseeing a construction project, was one of the things that made his chest feel full in the good way. A little left, she said. He moved it left. More. He moved it more. Perfect. She stepped back and assessed it with her arms crossed. It leans slightly, but I think that's the tree's personality. The tree has a personality? Everything has a personality if you look long enough. She set Gerald on the couch and started toward the ornament boxes. Did you invite Victoria for Christmas? Daniel went still, hands still on the tree trunk. No, he said. Why not? Because we haven't... He stood up. It hasn't come up. Lily opened the first ornament box and began sorting with the methodical focus she brought to all tasks. You talk to her almost every day. That's about the trial, and Ellie. You talked to her for 40 minutes last Tuesday, and you weren't talking about the trial the whole time because I heard you laughing in the kitchen. She held up a paper ornament she'd made in kindergarten, examined it, approved it, and set it in the to-hang pile. I'm not trying to make it weird. I just think she might be alone. Daniel looked at his daughter. You're 6, he said. I know how old I am, she said calmly. He stood there for a moment, with no reasonable response to that, which was a position Lily put him in more often than he was comfortable admitting. Then he went to get the stepladder. He called Victoria that evening. What are you doing for Christmas? He asked, without preamble, which was a thing he'd started doing with her, skipping the runway, going straight to the thing, because she was someone who appreciated directness, and he was someone who was running low on patience for any other approach. A pause on her end, the particular kind of pause that meant she was deciding how honest to be. Ellie and I were going to stay in, she said. I was going to make an attempt at a real dinner. My assistant offered to bring things over, but I told her I wanted to do it myself, which was probably ambitious. Come here, he said. Both of you. Lily's already decided. Lily decided? She asked me why I hadn't invited you yet. I didn't have a good answer. Victoria was quiet for a moment, and in the quiet, he could hear Ellie making the small sounds she made. Little protests and observations. The commentary of a 2-month-old who was, as Lily had accurately predicted, developing strong opinions about the world. "Daniel," Victoria said. "Yeah? What are we doing here?" He sat down at the kitchen table. It was a fair question. It was the question that had been living in the space between them for weeks, taking up room without being named, the way important things do when both people are too careful to name them first. "I don't know exactly," he said honestly. "But I know I want you to come for Christmas. And I know Lily wants to see Ellie. And I know that when I have a hard day, you're the person I want to call." He paused. "That's what I've got right now." Another silence. Longer. "That's enough," Victoria said quietly. "For right now, that's enough." She arrived on Christmas Eve with Ellie in a car seat carrier and a bag over one shoulder, and the look of someone who had packed for a baby for the first time without any institutional knowledge of how much a very small person requires. Daniel took the bag from her at the door. It weighed approximately as much as a transmission. And Lily was already reaching for the carrier, peering in at Ellie with the focused expression of a scientist who had been waiting some time for a specimen to arrive. "She's bigger," Lily said. "She's been eating," Victoria said. "She looks like she knows things." "She's been told things," Victoria said, and glanced at Daniel. "I've been telling her the airport story." "She won't remember," Daniel said. "I know. But it felt important to start." She stepped inside, looked at the tree, the slightly leaning personality tree with its collection of ornaments that range from store-bought to paper-made to one extremely weathered clay handprint that Lily had brought home from preschool. And something in her face softened in the specific way that houses with real history in them can make a person's face go soft. "It's wonderful," she said. "Lily runs a tight operation," Daniel said. "I'm choosing not to acknowledge that," Lily said from the floor, where she was now sitting cross-legged in front of the carrier, holding Gerald up for Ellie to see. "Gerald, this is Ellie. Ellie, you already know Gerald." She paused. "She remembers him. Look at her eyes." Ellie's eyes were doing what 2-month-old eyes do, tracking, blinking, managing the considerable project of focusing. And Daniel had no idea if she recognized the elephant. But Lily's certainty was complete, and that felt like enough. Victoria stood in the doorway of the living room and watched her daughter being introduced to a stuffed elephant by a 6-year-old girl. And Daniel watched Victoria watching them. And the moment had a particular quality that he recognized, but couldn't have named out loud without embarrassing himself. "Dinner," he said. "I made chili." "You made chili for Christmas Eve?" Lily requested it. She said Christmas food is a concept invented by people who weren't hungry enough. Victoria turned to look at Lily. "That tracks," she said. They ate at the kitchen table, the 4 of them. Ellie in the carrier on the chair beside Victoria, making occasional observations about the proceedings. And the conversation moved the way conversations move when people have been talking on the phone for weeks and are now discovering that the in-person version is somehow both easier and more electric. Victoria told a story about the first time she'd tried to present to a room full of investors and had mispronounced a word in her own company's pitch deck. A word I had used correctly in every previous context of my entire life. And Daniel laughed at the part where she described the face of the man in the front row. And Lily laughed because Daniel was laughing. And the kitchen was warm, and the chili was good, and outside the December dark had settled over Atlanta, and the whole thing had the feeling of something that had been coming for a while, and had finally arrived. Tell me something you've never told anyone, Lily said during a lull. She said it directly to Victoria, with the conversational confidence of someone who had not yet learned that this question was considered socially aggressive. Victoria looked at her. That's a big question. I know. Lily waited. Victoria thought about it. She held her spoon and thought about it the way she thought about hard questions. Seriously, without performing seriousness. When I started the company, she said, there was a year where I genuinely didn't know if it was going to survive. And I didn't tell anyone. Not my board, not my team, not anyone. I just kept moving. Every day I woke up and I thought, what's the one thing that has to happen today to keep this alive? And I did that one thing. She paused. And then one day, there wasn't a one thing that had to happen to keep it alive anymore. It was just alive. She looked at Lily. I've never told anyone that the year existed. Lily nodded. Dad does that too, she said. The one thing. Victoria looked at Daniel. It's a decent system, he said. It kept us both going, Victoria said. The sentence was simple, and she said it simply, and it landed on the table between them like something that meant more than the words it used. Lily looked between the two of them, with the systematic observation of a person cataloging information. Okay, she said, and went back to her chili. After Lily was in bed, she'd gone without argument, which she only did when she was genuinely exhausted or had decided the adults needed the room, and Daniel suspected it was the latter. He and Victoria sat on the couch with decaf coffee and Ellie asleep in the carrier between them. She's remarkable, Victoria said, for the third time in their acquaintance. But this time she was looking at Daniel when she said it, and it meant something different than it had before. You keep saying that. It keeps being true. She curled her hands around her mug. She asked me to tell her something I'd never told anyone. At dinner. Like it was a perfectly normal thing to ask. She does that. She says people keep things too far inside, and it makes them tired. Victoria was quiet for a moment. She's not wrong. No, Daniel said. She usually isn't. The living room was lit by the tree, the slightly tilted personality tree, and Ellie was making the small sounds she made when sleeping. And outside, it had started to rain, the Atlanta version of Christmas weather, soft and gray. Nothing like the white Christmases in movies, but real in a way that movies rarely were. Tell me something you've never told anyone, Victoria said. He looked at her. She started it, Victoria said. He sat with it for a moment. Then he said, The morning Rachel died, I was in the parking garage. I'd gone to get the car so I wouldn't have to take her through the cold when they discharged her for the last homestay. He stopped. The words came slowly, like they were being retrieved from somewhere deep. They called me before I got there, and I sat in the parking garage for 20 minutes before I went back up. He looked at his coffee. I've never told anyone that. People know I was there when she passed, which I was. I got there in time. But those 20 minutes in the garage... He stopped again. You were getting ready, Victoria said. I sat in my truck and Daniel, her voice was quiet and certain. You were getting ready. To be strong enough to go back in. To be who she needed you to be for whatever came next. She paused. That's not something to be ashamed of. That's who you are. He looked at her. She was watching him with that particular expression she had, the one that wasn't pity and wasn't sympathy exactly, but was something more direct, the look of someone who saw what was actually there and was not confused by it. The jaw thing, he said. Am I doing it? A little, she said. He unclenched it. She smiled. They sat in the quiet of the tree-lit room, and at some point, neither of them registered exactly when, The space between them on the couch became less space than it had been, and neither of them made a production of it. And Ellie slept, and the rain moved through Atlanta outside, and it was Christmas Eve, and it was enough. January came in cold and deliberate. Lily's 12-week review was on the 15th. Daniel sat across from Dr. Singh, in person this time, which Singh had suggested, and which Daniel had understood to mean there was something worth sitting across a desk to hear. And Singh had the results in front of him, pages of them. And Daniel had his legal pad, and they had been talking for 30 minutes. Inflammatory markers are down 47% from baseline, Singh said. Autoantibody levels are continuing to drop. The fatigue scores she's reporting, again, with remarkable consistency for a 6-year-old. She's methodical, Daniel said. She's extremely methodical. Her fatigue scores are down 60% from where she started. Singh looked at him over the desk. Daniel, I want to be careful with language here. We are 3 months into a 12-month protocol, and I do not use the word remission before the evidence supports it. Understood. That said, Singh put down his pen. The trajectory we're seeing in Lily is better than our best-case model projected at this stage. Better, in fact, than any of our 12 participants at the same point. He held Daniel's gaze. She is responding to this treatment exceptionally well. Daniel's legal pad was on his knee, and he was holding the pen, and he wasn't writing anything. Okay, he said. I want to run one additional blood panel in 6 weeks to confirm what we're seeing before I make any stronger statements. But I want you to understand that what I'm looking at is a child whose disease activity is moving in a direction that her original diagnosis did not make available. You're saying she might actually get better? I'm saying the data is pointing that way, yes. Daniel set the legal pad on the desk. He folded his hands. He breathed. The old way. The steady way. I need a minute, he said. Take all the time you need, Singh said. He sat there for that minute, maybe 2, and looked at the wall behind Singh's desk, which had diplomas and a photograph of a mountain. And he let the information settle into him the way large things settle, slowly, finding their level. He thought about Lily in the infusion chair with her word search. He thought about her saying, I'm more tired of being sick than I am scared of the treatment. He thought about Gate 14 and the 47 minutes in Cleveland, and Victoria's voice on the phone at 11 at night, telling him to stop doing the math on outcomes and start paying attention to what was already in front of him, which was what she said when he spiraled, and it always worked. He thought about Rachel saying, you were someone's miracle that day. About the village in Kandahar and a baby who had arrived early and uncertain and had breathed anyway. He thought about how everything that mattered in his life had come from someone else needing something, and him being, by chance or by habit, in a position to provide it. Thank you, he said to Singh. Thank Lily, Singh said. She's doing the work. He called Victoria from the parking lot. 47%, he said. She made a sound. He'd learned her sounds by now, the way you learn someone's vocabulary. And this one was the sound she made when something landed harder than she'd prepared for. Daniel. Down from baseline, 12 weeks. I know, she said. I got the preliminary numbers this morning. She stopped. I've been sitting with it all day. I didn't want to call you before Singh did. Victoria. Yes. She's going to be okay. He said it out loud for the first time, not as a question, not as a hope, but as a thing he was allowing himself to believe. She's actually going to be okay. He heard her breath catch. Yes, she said. I think she is. He leaned back against his truck in the parking lot and looked up at the January sky, which was the specific pale blue of winter, hard and clean, and he thought about all the parking lots he'd sat in when the news going the other way. This was different. This was the other kind of parking lot moment, the kind where you just needed to stand still and let something good reach you all the way. "Come to dinner," he said. "Friday. Bring Ellie." "We were going to come anyway. Lily texted me." He pulled the phone from his ear and looked at it. "Lily texted you?" "She has my number. She said she'd asked Deb at the clinic how to save a contact, and then she texted me to say, and I quote, 'This is Lily. I wanted to make sure I had you right. Also, Gerald says hello.'" Daniel stood in the parking lot with a January cold coming through his jacket. "I'm going to have to talk to her about the phone," he said. "Please don't," Victoria said. "It's the best text I've ever received." He laughed. The real one. In the parking lot, alone, in the cold, with the pale blue January sky overhead, and his daughter's test results in his jacket pocket. He laughed, and it wasn't rough anymore. It was finding its shape, getting used to being used. "Friday," he said. "Friday," she said. Marcus was waiting when Daniel got back to the shop. He was leaning against the workbench with his arms crossed, and the expression of a man who had spent all morning composing a response to news he hadn't received yet. Daniel walked in, set his jacket on the hook, and picked up the clipboard. 47%, he said, without looking up. Marcus didn't say anything for a moment. "Down?" he said. "Down. 12 weeks. Marcus made a sound, a short, compressed sound, and looked at the ceiling, and nodded several times in the way people nod when they're managing something in their chest that isn't comfortable to show directly. "Okay," he said finally. "Yeah," Daniel said. "Okay," Marcus said again, and picked up his own clipboard and got back to work. And that was the whole conversation. Because some things between people who know each other well don't require more than that. Daniel pulled the first repair order of the afternoon and read it and thought about Friday dinner and about Lily's blood numbers and about the way Victoria's voice sounded when something reached her. And he felt, steadily, without drama, with the particular quiet of a man who had spent a long time being strong and was now learning, slowly, to be something more than that. Genuinely, groundedly, carefully, fine. For the first time in 3 years, that was not a performance. Friday dinner became a thing. Not a scheduled thing, not a thing with rules or declarations attached to it, but a thing in the way that habits become rituals, without anyone deciding. The way water finds a groove in stone and then keeps following it. Victoria and Ellie came on Fridays. Lily made a place setting for Gerald at the table, which was non-negotiable, and Daniel cooked whatever Lily requested, which was a rotating menu of pasta, chili, and on one memorable occasion, a recipe she'd found in a library book for Moroccan chicken that had required 3 trips to different grocery stores and had been, against all odds, genuinely good. Ellie was changing fast, the way babies do in the first months, like they're in a hurry to catch up to the world they arrived in ahead of schedule. She'd found her voice, a varied, opinionated repertoire of sounds that Lily cataloged and interpreted with the seriousness of a linguist in the field. She was convinced Ellie's particular high sound meant she was commenting on the situation, and her low sound meant she was registering a complaint. "She's complaining about the carrots," Lily announced one Friday, listening to Ellie from across the table. "She can't eat carrots," Victoria said. "She can't eat anything. She's 4 months old. She knows they're there," Lily said with certainty. Victoria looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at his plate. These were the particular moments he had stopped trying to navigate and had started simply letting happen. It was Marcus who finally said what had been obvious to everyone in Daniel's orbit for 2 months. He didn't say it to Daniel. He'd already made his point in the shop in January and considered the matter registered. He said it to Lily, who had come in after school one afternoon to wait for Daniel to finish a job. She sat on the stool by the register, doing homework with Gerald beside her, and Marcus, who had been watching her work for 15 minutes, with the fond expression of a man who had no grandchildren and had decided provisionally to adopt one, said, "You like her, Victoria." Lily didn't look up from her math sheet. "Yes." "You think she's good for your dad?" This time, she did look up. She considered Marcus for a moment, with the serious assessment she reserved for questions that deserved real answers. "I think she sees him," Lily said. "A lot of people look at Dad and see the things he does. She sees the parts underneath." She tapped her pencil against the paper. "Mom saw those parts too. Dad thinks you can only have that once. I don't think that's how it works." Marcus looked at the 6-year-old on the stool. "No," he said after a moment. "I don't think that's how it works either." Lily went back to her math. Marcus went back to the engine he was working on and did not tell Daniel about the conversation, because some things are better left to find their own timing. And he was, despite all appearances, a man who understood timing. The thing that moved Daniel was smaller than he expected. He had imagined, in the abstract, that if he ever arrived at a moment where something shifted between him and Victoria, it would announce itself with some kind of weight, a significant conversation, a night that had the quality of a decision. He had experience with important moments. He knew what they felt like. He'd been braced. What actually happened was a Tuesday in February, nothing day, middle of the week. Lily had a rough one. Not a medical emergency, nothing like that. Just a day where the fatigue caught up with her, in the way it still occasionally did, and she came home from school, quiet and heavy-eyed, and ate half of dinner and asked to go to bed at 7, which she never did. Daniel got her settled, checked her temperature, normal, sat on the edge of her bed for a few minutes while she held Gerald and blinked slowly at the ceiling. "I'm okay," she said. "I know. It's just a tired day. Those happen. They happen less now." She looked at him. "That's because of the trial. That's because of Victoria." "Partly," he said. "And because you went across the room," she said. He smoothed the blanket over her shoulder. She was asleep inside 3 minutes, the way kids go, completely, without negotiation, one moment present and the next entirely elsewhere. He sat in the kitchen afterward, not doing anything, just sitting in the specific quiet of a house where a child is asleep and the ordinary business of the day has stopped. And he thought about what Lily had said. "Because you went across the room." He thought about all the rooms he'd been standing at the edge of for 3 years, not crossing. The rooms where grief lived, and the rooms where hope lived, and the room where the possibility of a future that looked different from the one he'd mapped lived. Quiet and patient, waiting. He picked up his phone. He didn't call. He texted, which he rarely did, because he was not a natural texter, and his messages tended toward the terse in ways that occasionally alarmed people. He wrote, "Lily's asleep. She had a tired day. She told me the trial is working because I went across the room." He stared at it. Then he wrote, "I've been thinking about rooms I haven't crossed yet." He sent it before he could revise it into something safer. 3 minutes passed. He watched the screen. Victoria wrote back, "I know which room you mean. I've been standing at the edge of it too." He read it twice. Then he wrote, "Friday?" She wrote back, "I'll bring Ellie." He put the phone down and sat in the quiet kitchen and felt the thing he'd been carefully measuring out in small doses, the hope thing, the future-facing thing, arrive without measuring, all at once, more than he'd allotted, filling the space he'd been keeping minimal and organized and manageable. He let it.
Friday came with Atlanta in the first suggestion of spring. The cold going soft at the edges, the evenings starting to hold a little light past 5. Lily had set the table with particular attention and had informed Gerald of the significance of the evening in terms she hadn't shared with Daniel, but the Gerald appeared to receive with appropriate gravity. Victoria arrived at 6. Ellie in the carrier, the heavy bag, her hair slightly undone from the day. She'd come straight from the office and had the look of someone who had decided not to stop and change, because stopping and changing would have been a kind of flinching, and she was not a flincher. Daniel opened the door. They looked at each other for a moment in the doorway, the way people look at each other when something has been said that changes the acoustics of the space between them. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she said. Lily appeared at his elbow. "You're 4 minutes late," she told Victoria. "But the pasta's fine. Come in." And just like that, the moment folded itself into the ordinary evening. Lily taking the bag, Ellie making her high sound about the carrots on the counter, the kitchen filling with the noise of people who knew each other's habits. And Daniel thought, this is what it feels like. Not the dramatic version, not the movie version. This version. The one where it slips into your regular life between the bag at the door and the pasta staying warm, and feels less like a beginning than like a continuation of something that was already underway. After dinner, after Lily was in bed and Ellie was asleep in the carrier, Daniel and Victoria sat at the kitchen table with the last of the wine and the comfortable mess of a meal that had been eaten and enjoyed. "I want to say something," Victoria said. "Okay." She looked at her glass, then at him. "I built my whole career on knowing what I wanted and going after it without apologizing for it. That's who I am professionally. Personally," she paused. "Personally, I've spent a long time being careful, keeping the professional and the personal in separate rooms. It seemed smart. It seemed safe." She turned the glass slowly. "It was lonely." "Yeah," Daniel said. "I don't want to be careful with you," she said. "I've been careful with you, and I'm tired of it. I want to say clearly that I am here, not because of the trial, not because of the airport, not because I owe you anything, but because I want to be here. Because you are—" She stopped, finding the word. "Because you are the steadiest person I have ever met. And I do not mean steady as in boring. I mean steady as in reliable, in the way that true north is reliable. And I haven't had that in my life before, and I find that I need it." She looked at him. "That's what I wanted to say." Daniel sat with it. He had the legal pad habit of wanting to write things down when they mattered, and he thought about writing this down. And then he thought that some things you just have to let stay in the air. "I told Rachel about Kandahar," he said. "The baby I delivered there. She said you were someone's miracle that day." He looked at his glass. "I didn't understand what she meant until the airport. Until you. I thought being someone's miracle was a one-time thing. Something that happened once and then was over." He looked up at her. "I think she was telling me something different. I think she was telling me that it's the kind of person you are, and that it would keep mattering." He paused. "That's the only way I know how to say what I mean." Victoria was very still. "It's enough," she said. "It's more than enough." He reached across the table, and she met him halfway. And it was as simple as that. A hand covering a hand in a kitchen in Atlanta on a February Friday with 2 sleeping children down the hall. And nothing exploded, and nothing announced itself, and the earth did not move. It just settled, like something finding the level it had been looking for. Lily's 12-month results came in on a Thursday morning in late April. Daniel sat in Singh's office with his legal pad and didn't write a single word. He didn't need to. He just listened. Inflammatory markers down 89% from baseline. Autoantibody levels within normal range for the first time in Lily's measurable history. Energy and function scores consistent with a healthy child her age. Disease activity undetectable. Singh said the word. Remission. He said it carefully, with the qualifications it deserved. Sustained remission is defined as a period of at least 6 months with no detectable disease activity. And we will continue monitoring, and this does not mean the illness is impossible to recur. And we want to see her every 3 months for the next 2 years. And Daniel heard all of the qualifications and absorbed them properly. But the word itself sat in the center of all of them like a stone that nothing could move. Remission. He thanked Singh. He shook his hand. He walked to his truck and sat in the parking lot. This parking lot. This specific lot. Where he'd been before for other things. Where parking lots had happened to him. And he put both hands flat on the steering wheel and looked at nothing. He didn't cry. He'd done the crying, in other parking lots, in other seasons. What he felt now was different. Not lighter exactly, but cleaner. Like a room that had been carrying weather for a long time and had finally been opened to the outside air. He sat there for a while. Then he called Marcus first. "She's in remission," he said. The sound Marcus made was not a word. It was the sound of a man who had watched another man carry something heavy for a long time and had just seen him set it down. "Okay," Marcus said finally, in a voice that was not remotely okay, in the way that voices get when they're carrying too much to be steady. "Yeah," Daniel said. "Okay." A pause. "Take the rest of the day." "I've gotta—" "Daniel, take the rest of the day." He took the rest of the day. He picked Lily up from school himself, which was a Thursday surprise. She usually took the bus. She came out of the building with her backpack and her lunchbox and found him leaning against the truck and stopped walking for a moment, her face doing the quick calculation it always did when something was outside the expected pattern. "What happened?" she said. "Good things," he said. "Get in." She got in. He drove for 10 minutes without saying anything, which she allowed because she was Lily, and she understood the architecture of important pauses. He pulled into the parking lot of the diner, the Cleveland diner transplanted to their Atlanta regular, the one with the grilled cheese and the chocolate milkshake, and turned off the engine. "Lily," he said. "Yes?" "Dr. Singh called this morning with your 12-month results." She was very still. Gerald was in her lap. She'd brought him to school in her backpack because of the significance of the week, she told him gravely. Gerald was still too. "And?" she said. "Remission," he said. "Full remission. No detectable disease activity." The word landed on Lily the way big words land on children. Fully, without the adult habit of managing reception, straight to the center. Her face changed. The composure she wore like a second skin. The composure she'd been wearing since she was 4 years old, and had first understood that her body was something that required particular attention. That composure came apart, quickly and completely, like a structure that had been built for necessary reasons and was now, finally, allowed to come down. She cried, hard, the way kids cry, with her whole face, no performance, just the thing itself. She pressed her face against Gerald's worn head and cried until Daniel put his arm around her, and she pressed her face against his shoulder instead, and he held her in the front seat of his truck in the parking lot of a diner and let her feel the full weight of what she'd been carrying for 2 years and what she was now being allowed to set down. "It's okay," he said, into her hair. "I know," she managed, muffled. "I know it is. That's why I'm crying." He held her tighter. After a while, she sat up and wiped her face with the back of her hand and looked at Gerald, and then at Daniel, with red eyes and the expression of someone who has been allowed to be 6 years old for a few minutes and is now carefully collecting herself. "Can I have the milkshake?" she asked. "You can have 2 milkshakes," he said. "I only want 1. I just wanted to know the option existed." He laughed. She laughed. They went inside. Victoria knew before he called her. Singh had called, per protocol, as the trial administrator. But she let Daniel tell her himself, because she understood that some things need to be said by the person they belong to. He called from the diner parking lot while Lily was in the bathroom washing her face. "She cried," he said. "Good," Victoria said, and her voice was thick with something she wasn't bothering to contain. "She said she was crying because she knew it was okay. That's why." Victoria made a sound that was not a word. "She's something else," Victoria said. "I know." "Daniel." "Yeah?" "Come over tonight, both of you. I want to be with you tonight." He looked through the diner window at his daughter's empty seat, at Gerald propped against the napkin holder, at the chocolate milkshake waiting, at the ordinary, beloved details of a life that had been, without his fully noticing, rebuilt from the inside out. "We'll be there at 6, he said. That evening, in Victoria's apartment, big windows, Ellie's things spread across every surface the way baby things colonize space. The warm smell of something cooking. Lily sat on the living room floor with Ellie on the playmat between them, holding a soft toy above Ellie's reaching hands and narrating the exercise in the patient tone of a pediatric physical therapist. "You've got it," Lily told her. "Come on, you've got it." Ellie's hand closed around the toy. Lily looked up at the 2 adults on the couch with an expression of pure, uncomplicated triumph. "She's got it," she announced. "She's got it," Victoria agreed. Daniel watched Lily turn back to Ellie, watched his daughter guide the baby's reach with a patience and steadiness that he recognized, that he knew the origin of, could trace back to a teacher who had a way of finding the simplest true center of complicated things and handing it to you. And he felt Rachel in the room. Not painfully, cleanly. The way you feel someone when they've been absorbed into something living and are still present in it. She'd be glad, Victoria had said. He thought, yes, she would. Victoria's hand found his on the couch. The same easy movement as the kitchen table, the same simplicity. And he turned his palm up and held on, and she let him. "Tell me something," he said quietly. She looked at him. "Something good," he said. She thought about it. Outside the windows, Atlanta was moving into evening, the spring dark coming soft and slow, the city going amber and blue. Ellie was making her high sound about the toy. Lily was explaining grip technique with the gravity of a coach. "I think we're going to be fine," Victoria said. "All 4 of us. I think that's the something good." He looked at her. He looked at Lily. He looked at the baby on the mat, who had arrived early and uncertain, and breathing into a world that had Daniel Hayes in it, standing in a terminal, ready to cross the room. "Yeah," he said. He held her hand and watched his daughter teach a baby to reach, in the amber evening, in the good quiet, in the life he had not planned and could not have imagined, and had been given anyway, through grief and through showing up, and through the radical, simple act of going across the room when someone needed it. Daniel Hayes had spent 3 years learning how to survive. He spent this evening, finally, learning how to live.